I was sleeping in my car outside the house I built with my own hands when the envelope appeared on my windshield. No postmark, no return address, just a train ticket to a station I'd never heard of, and 5 words that made my blood run cold. He waited for you. My name is Frank Meadows. I'm 47 years old, and 3 months ago I lost everything to the 2 people I trusted most. The envelope was yellowed at the edges, like it had been waiting years to find me. I remember my hands shaking as I picked it up, the October rain drumming against my Honda's roof. For 12 weeks, I'd been parking in the same spot every night, right across from 422 Maple Street, watching Boyd Hutchins live in my house, sleep in my bed, and tuck my children in at night. That envelope changed everything. But to understand why, you need to know how a small-town veterinarian ended up homeless, broken, and desperate enough to follow a mysterious train ticket into the unknown. My wife, Gretchen, and I had been married for 16 years. She was beautiful in that understated way that makes you look twice. Auburn hair she'd twist up with a pencil while doing paperwork, green eyes that crinkled when she laughed at my terrible jokes. We met when she brought an injured stray cat to my clinic. She stayed 3 hours to make sure it survived surgery. Most people would have just dropped it off, I told her. She looked me straight in the eye and said, "I'm not most people, Dr. Meadows." I was done for right then and there. Boyd Hutchins entered our lives like carbon monoxide, invisible, odorless, and deadly. Gretchen introduced him as our new handyman last spring. 6 feet 4 inches of muscle and tattoos, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Frank, honey, this is Boyd," Gretchen said that first day, her hand resting on his forearm a second too long. "He's going to fix that leak in the basement you've been too busy to handle." I should have paid attention to the way my son Colby stepped behind me when Boyd walked in. Kids and animals have the same instinct about dangerous people. My daughter Josie, usually chatty with everyone, went silent. Even Duke, our golden retriever who loved everybody, growled low in his throat. "Friendly dog," Boyd said, but his tone suggested Duke better learn to be friendlier fast. The truth is, I'd been losing Gretchen for years. I just refused to see it. 70-hour weeks at the clinic, emergency calls at midnight, missing school plays and soccer games, I told myself I was building something for our family. "Your patients get the best of you," Gretchen said one night, standing in our bedroom doorway. "We get whatever's left." I promised to do better, to hire another vet, to take that vacation we'd been planning since Josie was born, but promises are just words when actions don't follow. 3 months before that envelope appeared, I came home from a veterinary conference in Chicago to find Boyd's truck in my driveway at 11 p.m. "He's fixing the garbage disposal," Gretchen explained, not meeting my eyes. The disposal that worked perfectly fine when I tested it 10 minutes later. That should have been my first real warning. The second was finding Boyd's cigarettes in my nightstand drawer. The third was Gretchen suddenly needing book club meetings 4 nights a week. But I was Frank Meadows, respected veterinarian, Rotary Club member, the guy who coached Little League for 5 years straight. Men like me didn't have wives who cheated. Men like me didn't get replaced by unemployed bouncers who bench pressed more than I could deadlift. So I buried myself deeper in work, told myself the distance between Gretchen and me was temporary stress, told myself Boyd was just overly helpful to a fault. My father, Walter, disappeared when I was 15, left for work one morning and never came home. The police found his car at the bus station, his wallet still inside. The only explanation was a note on our kitchen table. "I'm sorry, this is the only way to keep you safe." Mom never recovered. She died 5 years later, they said from heart disease, but I knew better. She died from abandonment. I swore I'd never do that to my family, that I'd fight for them no matter what. Funny how life makes liars of us all. The morning everything exploded, I'd been throwing up since 4 a.m., bad seafood from a medical sales dinner the night before. My veterinary assistant Emma took one look at me and ordered me home. "Dr. Meadows, you're green. Go home before you infect everyone." It was 11:30 on a Thursday morning in July. The sun was blazing, the humidity suffocating. I remember thinking our central air would feel like heaven. I walked into my house through the garage door, the same way I always did. Duke didn't come running to greet me, which should have been my warning. The house was quiet except for sounds from upstairs. Not quiet exactly. There was music playing, something slow and sultry that Gretchen never listened to when I was home. Each step up our oak staircase felt like walking toward something I couldn't come back from. My hand touched the bedroom doorknob, the same doorknob I'd turned thousands of times over 15 years. Boyd was in my bed, wearing my robe, the expensive one Gretchen bought me for Christmas that I never wore because it felt too fancy for a guy like me. He was drinking coffee from my world's best dad mug, the one Colby made in third-grade art class. He looked up at me like I was a door-to-door salesman interrupting his morning. "You're home early," he said, not even attempting to cover himself or show shame. My life before Boyd Hutchins was everything a small-town American dream should be. I ran Meadows Veterinary Clinic on Main Street, right between Henderson's Hardware and the bakery that made those cinnamon rolls that brought people from 3 counties over. Every morning, I'd wake up at 5:30, make coffee in the kitchen I'd renovated with my own hands, and watch the sunrise paint our backyard gold. Gretchen would come down around 6:15, her hair messy from sleep, wearing one of my old college sweatshirts. She'd steal sips of my coffee, even though hers was brewing, a routine we'd perfected over 16 years of marriage. "Frank, you're going to be late," she'd say, even though I never was. I'd kiss her forehead, grab my lunch that she still packed for me every day, and head to the clinic. It was predictable, comfortable, and exactly the life I'd worked 60-hour weeks to build. I met Gretchen at a charity event for the county animal shelter in 2008. I was there providing free vaccinations. She was volunteering at the registration table. A woman brought in a massive, aggressive German shepherd that lunged at everyone who passed. People scattered, but Gretchen walked right up to that dog, sat on the floor, and just waited. 20 minutes later, that beast had his head in her lap while she stroked his ears. "How did you do that?" I asked her. "Patience," she said, looking up at me with those green eyes. "Everything worthwhile requires patience." We were married 14 months later in her parents' backyard. Her father, Paul, a retired mail carrier, pulled me aside during the reception. "Gretchen needs stability, Frank. She didn't have much growing up. Promise me you'll give her that." I shook his hand and promised. Paul died 2 years later from a heart attack, never knowing his daughter would become the kind of person who brings another man into her husband's bed. Our twins, Colby and Josie, were born during a February blizzard in 2013. I nearly crashed the car twice getting Gretchen to the hospital. Colby came first, quiet and observant even then. Josie followed 12 minutes later, screaming like she was angry about being second. "Two for the price of one," Gretchen laughed through exhausted tears. "Frank, we're parents." The weight of those words hit me like a beautiful truck. Everything I did from that moment forward would be for them. The veterinary practice grew faster than I expected. What started as me and one technician became a staff of 8, treating everything from hamsters to horses. I specialized in large animal medicine, driving out to farms at all hours when a cow had trouble calving or a horse colicked. The money was good, better than good. We bought the Colonial on Maple Street when the twins were 3, a fixer-upper that everyone said I was crazy to take on. "This house has good bones," I told Gretchen as we walked through rooms with peeling wallpaper and creaking floors. "We'll make it ours." And we did. Every weekend for 3 years, I restored that house. I stripped wood, laid tile, rebuilt the wraparound porch board by board. Gretchen painted the nurseries, planted gardens, turned that broken house into something from a magazine. Neighbors would slow down when they drove by, watching our progress. "The Meadows place," they'd call it. "Did you see what Frank did with the front columns?" But success has a price, and mine was time. Emergency calls didn't care about dance recitals. Sick animals didn't wait for family dinners. Daddy's saving puppies, Gretchen would tell the twins when I missed another bedtime story. At first, she said it with pride. Later, with resignation. Finally, with something that sounded like contempt. The changes in Gretchen were gradual, like watching someone lose weight. You don't notice day to day until suddenly their clothes don't fit. She joined a gym, started wearing makeup to grocery shop, bought clothes that seemed designed for someone else's approval. "I'm 44, Frank," she said when I commented on a particularly short dress. "I won't be attractive forever." "You're beautiful," I told her, meaning it. "You haven't really looked at me in years," she replied. And maybe she was right. Boyd appeared like he was answering a casting call for everything I wasn't. Where I was soft around the middle from too many rushed dinners, he had abs you could see through his t-shirt. Where I spoke quietly, measured from years of calming frightened animals, he commanded rooms with his volume alone. Where I fixed animals, he fixed houses, cars, motorcycles, anything mechanical that I'd never learned because I was too busy memorizing veterinary medicine textbooks. "Your husband works hard," Boyd told Gretchen one day while I was within earshot fixing our deck. "Must be tough being married to a saint." Gretchen laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. "Saints don't make good husbands, Boyd. They're too busy saving the world." I should have confronted her then, should have asked what she meant, fought for my marriage, been present instead of just providing, but I had a surgery scheduled, a young girl's cat that needed a tumor removed, and I told myself we'd talk later. There's always a later until there isn't. That Thursday in July started like food poisoning but ended with my entire life detonating. I stood in my bedroom doorway, staring at Boyd Hutchins in my bed, wearing my robe, drinking from my world's best dad mug. The ceiling fan I'd installed last summer spun lazy circles above him. The sheets Gretchen and I had picked out for our anniversary covered his legs. Everything in that room belonged to me except the man occupying it. "You need to leave," I said, my voice surprisingly steady for someone whose world was crumbling. "Get dressed and get out of my house." Boyd set down the coffee mug on my nightstand, right next to the picture of our family at Disney World. "Your house?" He laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. "Gretchen says you barely live here anymore. Says you spend more nights at the clinic than in this bed." "Where is she?" I asked, though part of me already knew she was letting this happen, that this wasn't some secret affair I'd discovered. "Getting her nails done," Boyd said, stretching like a cat. "Should be back soon. We were planning lunch at that new Italian place downtown. You know, the one you've been promising to take her to for 6 months. The casualness of it, the complete lack of shame or fear, that's what snapped something inside me. I stepped into my own bedroom and grabbed his clothes from the chair. "Get dressed and leave, or I'm calling the police." Boyd stood up then, all 6 feet 4 inches of him, my robe falling open. "Frank, buddy, you're not understanding the situation here. This isn't your room anymore. Hasn't been for months. You just didn't know it. The deed to this house is in my name," I said, my fists clenching around his jeans. "I rebuilt every inch of this place. While your wife was alone," Boyd stepped closer. "While your kids wondered why Daddy loved sick dogs more than them, you built a house, Frank, but Gretchen made it a home, and now she's made it mine." I threw his clothes at his chest. "Get out before I do something we'll both regret." That's when I heard the garage door opening. Gretchen's Suburban pulling in. Boyd smiled like he'd won the lottery. "Perfect timing. Let's ask the lady of the house what she wants." Gretchen walked up the stairs slowly, her heels clicking on each step like a countdown. She appeared in the doorway wearing a sundress I'd never seen before, her hair freshly styled, looking beautiful and cold as January ice. "Frank," she said, not even surprised to see me. "You're home early." "Gretchen, what is this?" I gestured at Boyd, still standing there in my robe. "What are you doing?" She walked past me like I was furniture, sat on the bed, and looked up at me with those green eyes that used to see me as a hero. I'm living my life, Frank. Something I should have done years ago. We have children, I said. We have a marriage. 16 years, Gretchen. 16 years of being your afterthought, she replied. 16 years of explaining to the kids why Daddy missed another recital. 16 years of sleeping alone while you saved every animal in the county, except the woman dying of loneliness in your own bed. So, you bring him here? Into our home? Into our bed? My home, Gretchen corrected. My bed. You just paid for it. That's when we heard the front door slam. Colby and Josie were home from school. I could hear their backpacks hitting the floor, Duke's nails scrambling on hardwood as he greeted them. "Mom," Josie called up, "whose truck is in Dad's parking spot?" "Don't you dare," I said to Gretchen. "Whatever this is, we handle it without them knowing." Boyd laughed again. "They already know, Frank. Who do you think makes them breakfast when you leave before dawn? Who helps with homework while you're at the clinic until midnight?" The sound of footsteps on the stairs. My children coming up to find their father facing off with their mother's boyfriend, both of us radiating the kind of anger that changes the temperature in a room. "Dad?" Colby appeared first, his face shifting from surprise to understanding to fear in 3 seconds. "What's happening?" "Your father was just leaving," Gretchen said. "No," I said, stepping forward. "This is my house. He leaves." That's when Boyd hit me. No warning, no wind-up, just his fist connecting with my ribs like a sledgehammer. I doubled over, gasping, and he grabbed my collar, dragging me toward the stairs. Josie started screaming. Colby tried to grab Boyd's arm, yelling, "Stop! Stop hurting him!" Boyd threw me down our staircase, the same stairs where I'd carried the twins up for bedtime 1,000 times. I hit the landing hard, felt something crack in my shoulder, tasted blood in my mouth. Through the pain, I could hear my children crying, Gretchen telling them Daddy had fallen, that everything was fine. Boyd stood at the top of the stairs, massive and triumphant. "You come back here again without permission, it'll be worse. This is my family now, Frank. You're just a paycheck." I looked up at my children's faces, saw them being held back by Gretchen. "Daddy," Josie sobbed, reaching for me. "It's okay, baby," I managed to say, pulling myself up. "Daddy's okay." But nothing would ever be okay again. The divorce proceedings were a masterclass in premeditated destruction. Gretchen's lawyer, a shark named Denise Cromwell from the city, presented a case that painted me as an absentee father who prioritized his practice over his family. She had documentation going back 2 years, missed school events, canceled vacations, nights when I didn't come home at all because I was monitoring critical patients. Every emergency call I'd taken, every surgery that ran late, became evidence of abandonment. Dr. Meadows earned $340,000 last year, Cromwell told the judge, a stern woman named Patricia Hawkins who seemed to have decided against me before I even sat down. Yet his children barely know him. His wife has been functionally a single mother while he built his veterinary empire. My lawyer, Tom Brennan, who I'd known since high school and probably should have hired someone better, tried to argue that I was providing for my family. Your Honor, Dr. Meadows worked those hours to give his children the best life possible. The house, the college funds, the stability that comes from financial security. Judge Hawkins looked at me over her glasses. "Money doesn't raise children, Dr. Meadows. Parents do." The assault charges I tried to file against Boyd went nowhere. He claimed I attacked him first, that he was defending himself and Gretchen. The police report noted my injuries as consistent with a fall downstairs. No witnesses except my traumatized children, who Gretchen wouldn't allow to testify. "We won't put them through that," her lawyer said, as if she cared about their trauma after letting them watch Boyd throw me down our stairs. In the end, I lost everything. The house I'd restored with my bare hands, the practice I'd built from nothing, Joint custody became supervised visits every other weekend. Even Duke, my loyal golden retriever who'd been my companion through vet school, was awarded to Gretchen because the children needed stability, and the dog was part of that stability. The financial settlement was crushing. $8.3 million, representing the value of my practice, our assets, and future earnings. I was ordered to pay $12,000 monthly in child support and $8,000 in alimony. After taxes and legal fees, I had enough money to buy a used Honda Accord and put down first month's rent on an apartment, except no landlord would rent to a man with an ongoing domestic situation and a questionable assault history. So I lived in my car, a 2008 Honda Accord with 180,000 miles and a broken air conditioner, parked across from the house I used to own. Every night, I watched Boyd's silhouette moving through rooms I'd painted, watched him tuck my children into beds I'd assembled, watched him let Duke out into the yard where I'd built a swing set that now sat unused because Boyd didn't push kids on swings. 3 months passed like this, showering at the gym, eating from gas stations, working locum shifts at emergency veterinary clinics 2 towns over where nobody knew my story. My supervised visits with Colby and Josie were agony. 2 hours every other Saturday at a community center, with a social worker taking notes on every interaction. "Dad, why can't you come home?" Josie asked during one visit, her voice small. "It's complicated, sweetheart." "Boyd says you chose work over us," Colby said, not meeting my eyes. "He says real fathers don't abandon their families." How do you explain to a 12-year-old that sometimes the villain wins? That justice doesn't always prevail? That the man tucking them in at night is a monster wearing the mask of a father figure? October arrived with early frost and bitter winds. My car became an icebox at night. I'd wear every piece of clothing I owned, curl up in the back seat, and watch my breath fog the windows. Some nights, I'd see Colby's face in his bedroom window, looking out at the street like he knew I was there. We'd stare at each other across 50 yards of darkness, father and son separated by more than distance. It was on such a night, October 15th, around 3 a.m., when the envelope appeared. I woke to find it tucked under my windshield wiper, wet from mist but somehow not soaked through. My hands shook from cold as I opened it. Inside was an old Amtrak ticket, the kind they used before everything went digital. Millbrook Station, Montana, it read, dated for October 16th, 8 p.m. departure. The handwritten note was brief. "He waited for you." I sat in my frozen car, studying that handwriting by streetlight. Something about the way the H curved, the particular slant of the letters, triggered a memory so old it felt borrowed from someone else's life. My father, Walter Meadows, teaching me to write cursive at our kitchen table. "Make your letters lean forward, Frankie," he'd said, like they're eager to get where they're going. My father had vanished 32 years ago when I was 15. One morning, he kissed my mother goodbye, ruffled my hair, and drove to work at the paper mill. He never arrived. His car was found at the bus station, wallet still in the glove compartment, keys in the ignition. The only explanation was a note on our kitchen table. "I'm sorry, this is the only way to keep you safe." The police investigated for months. No body, no trail, no explanation. Eventually, they declared him a voluntary missing person, probably dead. Mom never recovered. She stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped living in every way that mattered. 5 years later, I found her in bed, heart finally giving up on waiting for a man who would never come home. Now, 3 decades later, someone was claiming he'd waited for me. I had 2 choices. Stay in this car, in this purgatory of watching another man live my life, or take a train ticket to nowhere, following a ghost of hope that my father might somehow be alive, might somehow have answers, might somehow offer redemption from this hell I was living. I turned the key in the ignition. The Honda coughed to life, and I drove toward the train station, leaving behind the street where I'd spent 3 months dying one day at a time. The train to Millbrook Station took 18 hours through the heart of America's forgotten spine. I watched small towns blur past, each one looking like somewhere people used to live rather than currently inhabited. The ticket was for a sealed compartment, paid for by someone who wanted me traveling alone. I spent those hours staring at my reflection in the dark window, trying to recognize the hollow-eyed stranger staring back. Jerome, the elderly conductor who punched my ticket, studied it longer than necessary. "Millbrook Station," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of knowing something I didn't. "Haven't had a scheduled stop there in 20 years. Someone pulled serious strings to arrange this. Someone with connections. Do you know who?" He shook his head, but his eyes said otherwise. "Just be ready, son. Sometimes the past comes back for good reason, sometimes for bad. Either way, it comes back changed." Millbrook Station materialized out of Montana wilderness like something from another century. A wooden platform warped by weather, a single building with paint peeling off in sheets, surrounded by pine forests that seemed to press in from all sides. No town visible, no roads except a dirt track disappearing into trees. The train didn't even fully stop, just slowed enough for me to jump off before accelerating back into the night. The station house had one light burning in a window. The door was unlocked, hinges screaming as I pushed it open. Inside smelled like medicine and old wood, dust, and something else. Aftershave I recognized from 32 years ago. He was in a wheelchair by the window, oxygen tank beside him, watching the spot where the train had left me. Even dying, even withered to half his former size, I knew him instantly. The way he held his shoulders, the particular angle of his head when thinking, the hands that had taught me to tie fishing flies and throw a curveball. "Hello, Frankie," my father said, turning to face me. His voice was rougher now, scraped thin by illness, but unmistakably his. "I'm sorry it took me so long." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. 32 years of grief and fury and confusion crashed together in my chest. This man who'd abandoned us, who'd let Mom die of heartbreak, who'd missed every milestone of my life, was sitting here apologizing for being late. "You're angry," Walter said. "You have every right to be. But before you say anything, I need you to know why I left and why I'm breaking every rule to see you now." He wheeled himself to a filing cabinet, pulled out a thick folder stamped with government seals. "In 1993, I witnessed something I shouldn't have. 3 officers from our police department executing a man behind the paper mill. Turned out half our town's law enforcement was owned by a crime syndicate running drugs through Indiana. I was supposed to die that night too, but I ran. Made it to the FBI field office in Indianapolis." He opened the folder, showing me newspaper clippings, trial transcripts, photos of men in handcuffs. "They offered me 2 choices: testify and enter witness protection alone, or refuse and watch them come after you and your mother. There was no option where I got to stay." "You could have taken us with you," I said, finding my voice. "No, Frankie, I couldn't. You were 15, established in school. Mom was caring for her sick father. Uprooting you both, changing your names, living in fear forever. That wasn't a life. So I chose to disappear, to let you hate me rather than live running." He showed me another box, this one filled with photos. Hundreds of them. Me at high school graduation, my wedding to Gretchen, the twins' first birthday, my veterinary school commencement. All taken from distance through telephoto lenses. "Every moment that mattered, I was there," Walter said. "Hidden, but there. I've been Thomas Carpenter for 30 years, living here in Montana, working as a ranch foreman. But I never stopped being your father." "Mom died thinking you abandoned us," I said, anger finally breaking through shock. "I know," he whispered, and for the first time I saw tears in his eyes. "I sent her messages through handlers, begging them to tell her I was alive, that I loved her. They said it was too dangerous. She died not knowing, and that's something I'll answer for soon enough." He gestured to his oxygen tank. Lung cancer, 3 weeks, maybe 4. That's why you're here now. But there's more, Frankie. The reason I risked everything to bring you here. Walter wheeled to a desk, pulled out a laptop that looked absurdly modern in this decaying station. I've been watching you, too. Not just milestones. Everything. Including what that woman and her boyfriend did to you. He turned the screen toward me. Financial records, text messages, emails dating back 2 years. Gretchen started planning your destruction the day she met Boyd. He's not just some bouncer, Frankie. He's a professional con artist. Real name is Vincent Torelli. Wanted in 3 states for elderly abuse, fraud, identity theft. He targets lonely wives of successful men, helps them destroy their husbands, then disappears with everything. My legs gave out. I sank into a moth-eaten chair. How do you know this? Because I still have friends in certain agencies, friends who owe me for testimonies that put dangerous people away. I've been building a case, Frankie. As of 6 hours ago, federal marshals have warrants for both of them. Fraud, conspiracy, assault. Your children are being placed in emergency custody until you can claim them. He pulled out another document. One more thing. Thomas Carpenter was a successful man. Careful investments, patents on ranch equipment innovations, 30 years of compound interest. There's a trust in your name worth $10 million. I couldn't be your father when you needed me, but I can make sure you and my grandchildren never suffer again. Dad, I started, but he held up his hand. I don't want forgiveness, Frankie. I want you to know that every choice I made, right or wrong, was to protect you. I want you to rebuild your life, raise your children, and know that sometimes love looks like leaving. I spent 2 weeks with my father in that abandoned station house he'd converted into a makeshift home. Every day, we talked from sunrise to sunset, filling 32 years of silence with words that should have been spread across decades of ordinary conversations. He told me about the nightmares that followed his testimony, about Christmas mornings spent alone staring at photos of the family he'd protected by leaving. I told him about Mom's final days, how she called his name at the end, still believing he'd walk through the door. I wrote her letters every week for 5 years, Walter said one evening, watching the Montana sun disappear behind mountains. Never sent them, but I wrote them. They're in that box by the door. Maybe someday you can burn them for me, let the smoke find her. His predictions about Boyd and Gretchen were precisely accurate. Federal marshals arrested them at my former house, Boyd trying to escape through the same back door I'd installed 3 summers ago. Vincent Torelli, his real name, had 14 previous victims across the country, women he'd helped destroy their husbands before draining their accounts and disappearing. Gretchen was victim number 15, though she didn't know it yet. He'd already transferred $400,000 of our money to offshore accounts she couldn't access. The arrest happened during dinner. Colby called me from a social worker's phone, his voice shaking. Dad, they took Mom and Boyd away in handcuffs. Boyd tried to run, but they caught him in the backyard. He fell into the koi pond you built. There was poetic justice in that image. Boyd face down in the water. Feature I'd spent 3 weekends perfecting while Gretchen complained I was wasting time on fish instead of family. Walter died on a Tuesday morning, October 30th, exactly 2 weeks after I'd arrived. We were sitting on the station platform, sharing coffee from a thermos, watching the sun climb over endless pines. He was telling me about the time he'd watched from a parking garage as I performed emergency surgery on a dog hit by a car, saving it on a sidewalk with just my emergency kit. That's when I knew you'd become the man I hoped you'd be, he said. Then his hand found mine, squeezed once, and he was gone. Peaceful, like he'd been holding his breath for 3 decades and could finally exhale. I buried him in a cemetery in Billings, under his real name. The headstone reads, Walter Meadows, father, protector, he never really left. The legal proceedings that followed were swift. With Boyd exposed as a career criminal and Gretchen as his accomplice, The original divorce verdict was overturned. The house I'd restored returned to me, though I sold it immediately. Too many ghosts in those walls, too many mornings waking up to Boyd's shadow in my bedroom doorway. I was awarded full custody of Colby and Josie. The day I picked them up from foster care, Duke was with me, skinny and scared from Boyd's neglect, but tail-wagging like his world had been restored. "Dad," Josie said, running into my arms, "we knew you'd come back. We knew the truth would come out." "How?" I asked, holding both my children like I might never let go. "Because you're Dad," Colby said simply. "You fix things, even when they seem impossible to fix." With Walter's money and the settlement from the overturned divorce, I started over in Montana, not far from where my father spent his hidden years. I opened a new veterinary practice in a town that needed one, a small place where I know every client's name and never miss my kids' school events. The clinic closes at 5 p.m. sharp, no exceptions. Emergencies get referred to the 24-hour hospital 2 towns over. I learned that being a good veterinarian doesn't require sacrificing being a good father. Gretchen is serving 3 years for fraud and conspiracy. She writes letters I don't read, calls the kids on a schedule the court mandates. Boyd got 20 years federal time, though he'll probably serve 12. His previous victims testified at the sentencing, 14 women whose lives he'd shattered for profit. Gretchen sat in that courtroom learning she was just another mark, that every sweet word he'd whispered was scripted, that she'd destroyed her family for a con man who'd already forgotten her name. The old Millbrook station has been restored as a memorial library. I used part of Walter's money to rebuild it, to create something permanent from our brief reunion. There's a plaque by the door. Sometimes love requires distance. Sometimes protection looks like abandonment. Sometimes the people we think have forgotten us are actually holding us up from shadows we never knew existed. Every Sunday, I take Colby and Josie to visit Walter's grave. We tell him about our week, about school and friends and Duke's latest mischief. Josie leaves drawings she's made, pictures of a grandfather she only knew for 2 weeks, but loves like she knew him forever. Colby plays his guitar, songs he's learning in music class, the one activity I never miss. That envelope with no return address sits framed in my office, next to a photo of Walter and me from those final 2 weeks. Patients sometimes ask about it, this yellowed envelope in an expensive frame. I tell them it's a reminder that salvation can come from the most unexpected places, that sometimes the people we think abandoned us are actually fighting battles we can't see, that love doesn't always look like presence. My father waited 32 years to save me. He gave up everything, his name, his family, his life, to keep us safe from shadows we never knew existed. Was it the right choice? I don't know. But I know that when I needed him most, when my life had collapsed to nothing, he appeared with perfect timing, like he'd been watching all along, waiting for the moment I'd need a father more than I'd need answers. Some nights, when the Montana wind rattles the windows and Duke is snoring at my feet, I think about the train ticket that brought me here. How did Walter know I'd be sleeping in my car that exact night? How did he know I'd be desperate enough to follow a cryptic note to an abandoned station? Then I remember. He'd been watching for 32 years. He knew, because fathers know, even from impossible distances, even through decades of silence when their children need them. The last thing Walter said before he died was, "Love doesn't end, Frankie. It just changes shape." He was right. His love shaped itself into absence to keep us safe, into money to secure our future, into 2 final weeks to explain a lifetime of distance. And now it shapes itself through me, in the way I love Colby and Josie, in the presents I give them that I couldn't give before, in the promise that I'll never choose anything over them again. The man who lost everything to his wife's boyfriend and a corrupt system found redemption in an abandoned train station with a father he thought was dead. It sounds like fiction, like something too convenient to be real. But sometimes life writes better stories than we could imagine. Stories where the third act reveals the first act was never what it seemed, where abandonment was actually protection, where loss becomes the doorway to everything we actually needed. If you've made it this far in my story, you know that life can shatter us in ways we never see coming, but also restore us through people we never expected. Share this video if it touched you. Comment below with your own story of unexpected redemption, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that remind us that even in our darkest moments, someone might be watching from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to pull us back into the light.